Hi friends, let's talk about the reasons why the Declaration of Independence defines true American values and American patriotism as the modern day liberal. Part 1. First, we have to define patriotism, but the Founding Fathers did that for us. That's what the Declaration of Independence is all about. Everybody remembers the part about the self-evident truths, but the real meat of the Declaration is that list of grievances, because those were the things that the Founding Fathers felt were so heinous and so disgusting for a government to do that they needed to throw off that old government and find new guards for their future security. So they founded a new country to ensure that the government would not commit these grievances again. So let's look at those grievances and consider which political viewpoint might they support best today. Part 2. We're looking at the list of grievances, and the first grievance says that the king had refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Now this refers back to the second paragraph of the Declaration that reminds us that governments only have power by the consent of the governed. It also is about the fact that all citizens have those unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So this king, who was not a duly elected representative of the people, was refusing these laws, and that was unacceptable. But basically it's reminding us that the government does not sit above the people. We have a government by the people, of the people, for the people, and that means that no government institution is superior to the people. It's quite the reverse. The people are superior to all branches, all institutions of government. And the second paragraph of the Declaration reminds us that when a government infringes upon those rights, it becomes our obligation to alter or abolish it. So basically, we have to alter or abolish any government institution that is infringing upon the rights of the people. For example, the right to life. If we have a government institution that is kneeling upon people's necks and killing them, then we need to change that institution. Part 3. We're looking at the list of grievances, and we're looking at the second through the sixth grievances that deal with the ways the king had manipulated the government in order to assert his will over the will of the people. The second grievance with how he'd forbid his governors to pass laws. The third with how he refused to pass laws allowing for rightful representation. The fourth grievance with how he'd made legislative bodies inaccessible to the people. The fifth grievance with dissolving representative houses. And the sixth grievance with refusal to allow the election of new representatives or government leaders. So today, any government leader or representative that refuses to vote on or allow a vote on laws is behaving in a wholly un-American manner. In other words, the filibuster is behaving like that petulant King of England and is un-American. Likewise, refusing to hold a vote to fill a vacant Supreme Court spot is behavior equivalent to Imperial Britain and loses anyone doing so the right to call themselves a patriot. Part 4. We're looking at the list of grievances and at the seventh grievance, which is of particular importance throughout American history and still today. It states that the king had obstructed laws allowing for the naturalization of foreigners, of immigrants, and refused to pass laws that would encourage immigration to the United States. So remember, these grievances were the things that the Founding Fathers felt to be so heinous and so disgusting that they needed to get rid of that old government so that they could create a new government that would not do these things. In other words, they wanted to encourage immigration to the United States, and they wanted to make it relatively easy for immigrants to become naturalized citizens. To oppose this is un-American and unpatriotic. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence. Part 5. We're looking at the 8th and 9th grievances that deal with judges and judiciary powers. The king had obstructed administration of justice and refused laws establishing judiciary powers, and required judges to act in a way he wanted rather than independently, and made their salaries dependent on doing so. So first, as mentioned before, this shows that refusing to hold hearings or confirmations for nominated Supreme Court justices is an entirely un-American practice. But I think these grievances, we can also look into them for the fact that, like the second paragraph of the Declaration says that governments only have power by the consent of the governed, that we give this legislative body power to create the court. That's what's in the Constitution, but we'll talk about that later. And that court has to operate by the consent of the governed. So for us to institute a code of ethics upon that court makes perfect sense. And to hold those Supreme Court justices accountable to that ethics code makes perfect sense. It's right there in the Declaration. That's what would be a patriotic attitude. Part 6. Looking at the list of grievances, the 10th grievance deals with how the king had created many offices of government solely for the purpose of sending the people appointed to those offices to harass the American people. The grievance deals with the fact that the government exists only to secure the rights of the people of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as stated at the beginning of the Declaration. So, any government office that does not serve that purpose is unnecessary. But more importantly, any government office serves the people, not the other way around. Meaning any behavior or law that is meant to hold a government system or institution above the rights of the people is un-American. If a government system or institution is infringing upon those unalienable rights of the people, then it must be altered or abolished, as the second paragraph of the Declaration says. Part 7. Now this is an extension from the last part where we talked about the 10th grievance, so extending directly into the 11th and 12th grievances, which deal with standing armies and the problems with military power being superior and independent of the civil power. The 12th grievance directly implying that nothing is superior to the civil power. And to be clear, the civil power that they refer to is the people directly. In other words, no government agency or institution has the power or right to infringe upon the civil liberties of the people. And once again, if the government agency is doing so, it is our obligation to alter or abolish it. To be even more clear, to go deeper on these ones, standing armies were being used by Britain against Americans as armed police. So it is the police in our country today who still do not have the right to infringe upon our civil liberties. That is actually the reason that when arresting someone, police have to read the Miranda rights. But that deals with the Constitution, so we'll look at that more in the future when we deep dive the Bill of Rights. Part 8. Now we're looking at the list of grievances, and we're going to look at the 13th grievance, which deals with the fact that the king had attempted to subject the Americans to foreign jurisdiction and gave his assent to their acts of pretended legislation over us. Now in modern context, if we find that the United States is now trying to subject others outside our country to our jurisdiction, then we are committing that same crime. So for example, when we're talking about jurisdiction, why isn't Washington, D.C. a state? Why isn't Puerto Rico a state? Those would be ways of bringing those areas into the jurisdiction of the United States, but doing so legally. Part 9. We're looking at the list of grievances, and we're at the 14th and 15th grievances, which deal with quartering large bodies of armed troops, and then protecting them by mock trials from punishment for any murders which they committed against Americans. So once again, armed police are not above the law, and they have no right to infringe upon the civil liberties of Americans. Part 10. We're looking at the list of grievances, and we're on to the 16th grievance, which talks about the cutting off of trade with all parts of the world. This one has a special place for me personally because I served in the United States Navy. Part of the Navy's primary charter during times of peace is to maintain the freedom of the seas. But more to the point, our forefathers found it to be a problem that the king was attempting to force the colonies to trade only with England. Therefore, it should never be the policy of the United States that anyone else should be forced to trade only with us. And the Charter of the U.S. Navy holds very true to this base American principle that we maintain freedom of trade for the world, not just ourselves. Part 11. Now we're looking at the list of grievances, and it's the 17th grievance that many people are aware of. It was something of a battle cry during the Revolution, and it is still remembered today. This is the one about taxation without representation. However, in modern contexts, since it is a core American value that we do not tax anyone without their consent through representation in government, then to oppose statehood for Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico would be fundamentally un-American and unpatriotic. Part 12. We're looking at the list of grievances, and the 18th grievance calls out the way Americans had been deprived in many cases of the benefits of the trial by jury. Obviously, then, any government official who deprives a citizen of trial by jury is behaving in a wholly un-American manner. So there are a couple of very obvious examples we can look at. For one, while police officers might have the right to defend themselves in cases of violence, if instead they're kneeling on the neck of a detained citizen and end up killing the detainee, then they have deprived that person of trial by jury. For another, new laws being passed in places like Georgia that give legislators the right to fire prosecutors completely undermines the trial by jury aspect of our judicial system. And when government officials have been put through a trial by jury and are refusing to accept and denying the decisions made by that trial by jury, they are again undermining the trial by jury system and behaving in an un-American and unpatriotic manner. Part 13. Looking at the list of grievances, when we get to the 19th grievance, it complains of citizens being transported beyond oceans to be tried for pretended offenses. In other words, a citizen should be tried locally for any offenses of which they are accused. But that also implies that the citizen should be present for the trial. So Delta Tango refusing to be present for his trial, even in a civil matter, doesn't really make sense. It seems very unpatriotic when you consider what the Declaration of Independence says. Part 14. We're looking at the list of grievances, and the 20th and 21st grievances have an interesting but obvious application today. The 20th refers to the way the free system of laws had been abolished in a neighboring province, referring to what is now part of Canada, and then using that as an example in an attempt to do the same in the colonies. The 21st grievance refers to taking away American charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and fundamentally altering forms of government. In today's context, that is exactly what Georgia has done with this law that lets legislators fire prosecutors. They have fundamentally altered the form of government there. And I remind us again that these grievances were the things that our founding fathers regarded as so heinous and so disgusting that they needed a new country in order to ensure they didn't happen. And yet they're happening right now in the United States. The legislators doing this have forfeited all right to call themselves patriots, and they're behaving instead like that petulant king that we severed ties from. Part 15. Looking at the list of grievances, we get to the 21st that complains of suspending legislators and then the ones doing the suspending, claiming that they have the power to legislate for all of us in all cases. This is exactly what Tennessee did when they recently suspended legislators, giving themselves the power to legislate for everyone, including those who no longer had representation in the legislature because of the suspensions. Any Tennessee legislator that voted to suspend other legislators has committed exactly this grievance of the Declaration of Independence and has therefore forfeited all right to call themselves a patriot, because clearly they are not. Part 16. We're looking at the list of grievances, and we get to the 23rd through the 26th grievances, which deal with ways in which the king was instituting war against the colonies. In today's context, it is quite clear that the violent tendencies of our partisan politics applies. When politicians or their supporters advocate for violence against their opposition, they are committing these grievances. Anyone who wishes to use violence against political opposition in this country is not a patriot, not an American, and doesn't deserve to be here. Part 17. In the list of grievances, the 27th and final grievance of the Declaration of Independence calls out the king for having excited domestic insurrections amongst Americans. It is a travesty that the press continues to refer to it as the January 6th insurrection instead of the Trump insurrection, which is what it was. Trump excited domestic insurrections and in doing so violated this grievance and proved that he lacks all patriotism for America. Part 18. In the final paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence, after that list of grievances, it actually points out that the colonies had attempted redress, both with the king and with the British legislature, but their concerns had fallen upon deaf ears. It's hard not to see the parallels in partisan politics in the United States today, where one side argues for understanding that these grievances, these problems, still exist here today, and by these fundamental and core American values, they must be altered or abolished, as it says in the second paragraph of the Declaration. And that's what would create a better future for all Americans, but the other side is proving to be deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity, and furthermore proving that they are not American patriots, but in fact quite the opposite. The Declaration closes by pledging to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Like, shouldn't we do the same? Sure, but it really points out the fact that American values are about everyone. It's not about me, it's not what's best for me, it's not about American individualism. It's about working together to make the country a better place for everyone, for all American citizens.